So, hello everyone, and this week's parsha we start a new book, Vayikra, which has a lot of sacrifices in it. And to us, that is a problem because it's so foreign to us, the whole idea of sacrifice. So I wanted to see if there's anything we can make sense out of all these sacrifices. And there's a great detail of sacrifices. It's not just bring sacrifices whenever you want. There are different types of sacrifices, and there are different laws for each type of sacrifice. So let's begin with the basic commandment, where the Torah tells us that's how the book of Vayikra opens up.
To my laptop.
So can we make sense of sacrifices? So we look at this picture, we can understand the offer of incense. We can understand washing our hands and feet in the basin. We talked about that last week. But this is just so alien to us. Why take an innocent animal and kill her? Why did God command us to do this? So let's look first of all at the Hebrew word for sacrifice, because it's not really in Hebrew. It doesn't really mean sacrifice. What is the Hebrew word?
Korban.
Yes, kolban. So let's look at that word. What is the root of the word kolban?
I'm
near to God.
Very, very good, very good. So let's look at the first verse, or the beginning of our parsha. דבר בני ישראל ואמרת עליהם, אדם כי יקריב מכם קורבן לאדוני. So already you see that the verb yakriv is very, very same root as kolban. So let's see how the JPS translated it. A volunteer to read the JPS.
Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any of you presents an offering of cattle to the Lord.
So were they able to capture the similarity between yakriv and kolban?
No.
Not really.
No.
But they did call kolban an offering. Like when you offer something, you come close. So I think they are getting close to the original meaning in Hebrew, pardon the pun. But when they yakriv, right, in English, no connection to offering. Now, I told you about Professor Fox and his translation of the Torah. He just tried to capture that and to bring you the same, the similarity of roots in different words. So let's see how he did it. And he volunteered to read Professor Fox's translation.
They speak to the children of Israel and say to them, anyone, when one among you brings near a near offering for God from domestic animals.
So look, he really tried to connect it to the idea of near, of karov, both in the verb, bring near, and in the word he uses for sacrifice, which he calls near offering. So I like that very much. But then that actually raises our question even to a greater extent. Is that how you come near God? Because what's the word for far in Hebrew?
Rachok.
So I wanted to bring you a verse. Is Niv with us today? Not yet. There's a verse in Isaiah that has both near and far in the same verse. And this is where Niv's name comes from. בורא ניב שפתיים, שלום שלום לרחוק ולקרוב, אמר אדוני ורפאתיו. So they switched the order in the translation. So they started with a shalom shalom, peace, peace to him that is far off and to him that is near. Said the Lord, Amar Adonai, that creates the fruit of the lips, and I will heal him. So you can also see the meaning of niv is fruit of the lips, or speech, really. Something that grows from your lips. It has to do with growth. And by the way, he was born a preemie, and we thought that would be an appropriate name for him to grow, to
Grow.
so that's so we have a chok and we have kalom. Now, again, looking at this picture, and you think this brings me close to God. This actually makes me rachok from God. To take an innocent animal and kill it. So it made me think maybe the word for korban should have been ochkan. Korban seems like a euphemism, right? To kind of couch it in language. But really, when you think about the act, the slaughter, the blood, the taking, killing God's creature. So this didn't trouble just us. It troubled already back in the Midrash times. Midrash times were already troubled by this whole idea of killing animals to come close to God, close, quote unquote. So let's see a Midrash from Vayikra Rabbah. Says the Midrash, better that they bring their offerings to my table than that they bring them before the idols. So what is the Midrash essentially saying here?
Oh, that people are going to want to sacrifice animals, so it's better to do it to God than to the idols.
Excellent, right? So God is conceding. They have this immense desire, this very, very strong desire to bring animals because everybody else is doing it. All the nations surrounding them. This is the only form of worship that was actually that they recognized in the ancient world. And so I can't take them away from it altogether. So I better turn that energy to my table.
Didn't many of the nations also practice human sacrifice? So maybe this was one step above.
Oh, I like that explanation very much. So if I totally forbid it, then they might just ignore my prohibitions and actually sacrifice human beings. And we saw with Akedah, we had a whole discussion, a very interesting discussion with you guys about, Abraham seems to be willing to do it at the beginning. Then I offered an interpretation that he decided in the end not to do it. But yeah, if Abraham was willing to do it, then the Israelites are certainly prone to predisposed to doing that. So God needs to make very, very strict commandments with very strict laws, what you can offer, what you cannot offer. And that is actually part of the laws, and not just not humans. We'll see even among the different types of sacrifices, certain sacrifices you can eat, certain sacrifices, you bring them all together on the altar. They all get all burned up. So very, very strict laws that differentiate between sacrifices. Now, the Rambam, he took this a step further. He explained it and articulated in further detail. So any volunteer to read how the Rambam explained the sacrifices? Anyone? Okay, I'll read. The Torah, as Onkelos reads it, tells us clearly that the ancient Egyptians worshipped the constellation Aries. So they prohibited slaughtering sheep and abominated shepherds. That's why the Israelites in Egypt had their own city. It's already mentioned in Genesis, the end of Bereshit, where Joseph tells Pharaoh, my brothers can't be among all the Egyptians because they are shepherds and they slaughter sheep. And then Pharaoh says, okay, then you live in a segregated area in Goshen. Beyond that, some Sabian sects worshipped jinn and believed they took a goat form. That is why they called jinn fauns. The Sabians feature a lot in the Rambam's writings. They were a pre-Islamic sect that Rambam understands Abraham as trying to pull away from them and fight their beliefs. And then he continues. This is the Rambam. Such beliefs were quite widespread in the days of our teacher Moses. No more shall they sacrifice to goats. So these sects forbade eating goat meat, and slaughtering cattle was abhorrent to nearly all pagans. They all venerated these beasts. So you'll find even today that Hindus never slaughter cattle, even in lands where other beasts are slaughtered. And now comes the main point. To blot out all trace of such unsound beliefs, then, we were commanded to sacrifice animals of these three kinds specifically, of the herd and the flock. So it's really just to eliminate or negate the practice of the idol worshippers, to avoid, to blot out the chance, to prevent the chance that the Israelites will be attracted to those beliefs, to those pagan beliefs. So the animals have to pay the price. Okay, now I want to talk about one type of animal, one type of sacrifice, of offering. The offering called the chatat, the sin offering. So you bring that when you commit a sin, and now you're made aware. So you come to the temple, and you have to bring a sin offering. So I want to show you a commentator. It's not a commentator with an abbreviation. It's not Rambam, Rashi, Ramban. It's a guide, a tour guide at the park, the Timna Park that I showed you last week, where they did a replica of the tabernacle. And he's taking them on a tour of that tabernacle. And this is his theory of the sin offering. Let's hear him and then tell me what you think. I want to trigger some discussion. So you'll hear how he explains the sin offering, and then you tell me what you think of it.
To be near to the people, right? He has a covenant with the people. He has this relationship with the people, but that relationship and that covenant is broken, and God can not actually have people in his presence, all because of sin. Okay? God is a holy God. The people, if you have sin, you cannot be. You're actually still separated from God. Even here, even though God is actually physically very close, right? I mean, you can see that it's only about, 15 meters away from where people would actually have their tents. So even though it's that close, God is still separated. You can't see God. You can't enter the Holy of Holies. You can't touch the Ark of the Covenant. Still very much separated. So the most important work of the priest is to be continuously making payments for that sin. Okay, that's continuously happening among the people over here. So how do you pay for sin? Well, what's the judgment? What's the penalty on sin? Death, right? If you don't want to die for your sin, you need to find someone else who will die for your sin. That's what a sin sacrifice is. The person who is guilty of that sin, whatever it was, brings an innocent animal over here to the gate of the tabernacle, and the life of the animal is taken instead of his life actually being taken. So the person gets to go free and live, and the animal pays with its life for the freedom of the person who actually brought him here in the first place, the person who's actually guilty of that sin. So this is a substitution, right? So the animal dies instead of the person dying. The animal dies for the sins of the person. Okay, so the life of the animal is taken. If you look in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11, it says the life is in the blood. God says, I'm giving you this blood on the altar in order to atone for your souls, because only blood can provide atonement. So the priest would take the blood of the animal. The priest would take the blood of the sacrifice and you'd put it on the four horns of the altar, and then the rest of the animal, the rest of the blood, he would pour around the altar at its base. So again.
Okay, what do you think of that theory?
I think it's exactly like Christianity. It's exactly what the Christians say, that Jesus died in order to counter our sins.
Yeah, I think it's striking resemblance, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It sounds like a very Christian interpretation. That the animal, has to die.
Is this guy building an altar? It looks like he's building something there.
This is already built. This is you can visit this in Israel near Eilat. They built a whole replica, the Mishkan here, and then the Mizbach Olah, and with the ramp. They try to make a real size replica of what the Mishkan in the desert with all the accoutrements and this, right? So, and then they take people on tours. And so I don't even know what's his name. He was explaining something that actually didn't. Like Aaron said, it really sounds a little bit like a Christian understanding of the sin offering. The Torah never says you were supposed to die and therefore you should bring a korban chatat. So we're going to look at other explanations of.
I have one thing. What about Abraham and he brought Yitzchak and they sacrificed what? Calf or
ram?
The ram. Oh, we'll get to that. Jack makes a very good point. So he's one of the first people to bring offerings, and there is a substitution there, right? instead of Isaac. He's gonna. But there he got commanded to sacrifice. Like that goes into the whole idea of human sacrifices. But then maybe that was already clearly delineated that there's not going to be any human sacrifices. God makes it very clear. Why do you need to go through that again each time you bring a korban chatat? So I'm looking for a different explanation. I want to see a different explanation of the different the sin offering, but also different offerings. So what types of offerings do we have? So we talked about one of them, the sin offering. What else do we have?
The olah, the burnt offering.
Okay,
The
so we have
olah.
the olah, right? What do we know about the
Hey.
olah? We know that it goes up. Ole means goes up. All of it goes up onto the altar. So total consumption.
Can I make a point about the olah? That's in Latin, it's holocaustum. And that's the origin of the term that we use today, Holocaust.
Yeah, yeah.
Burnt,
So,
burnt, completely burnt.
yes,
Holo, cost. Cost is burnt
yeah. So,
in Latin.
great
The olah
point.
is called the Holocaustum in Latin and the Greek Bible.
Oh, very interesting. So, and they used it because that's what happened to us by the Germans and all their people who aided and abetted them, the Polish and Ukrainians and so on. So, that seems to be the most unexplainable one. Why? Because nobody gets to eat from it. So this is like hunting. I'm totally opposed to hunting where you don't eat the animal. I'm not talking about kosher laws. I'm just talking about like general public. Just people do that as a sport, and that seems so cruel to me. You're just killing animals for the fun of it.
But in the Torah,
Yeah.
doesn't it say that the smell of the burnt offering goes up to heaven and it's good? Doesn't it say something like that? I seem to.
Yeah. Absolutely, great point. So what does that mean? Yeah, why does God need that smell to sort of why does God need to kill the animal for that smell? We can create the smell with plants, with the incense, with the Ketores. Okay, so let's leave that as a question. Then we have Shlamim. That's actually a joyous moment because it's a joyous occasion where you're bringing a thank you offering for something good that happened in your life. Maybe you got recovered from a serious disease, and then you would share the meat. You would have a steak together, your family, and you would give a little bit also to the Kohen. And the sin offering, you would bring it because you made a sin. You don't get to eat, but who gets to eat?
Priests.
Priests get to eat. They still eat from the meat of the sacrifice. Okay. So let's try now and see. Let's now see a video. Let's bring in Rabbi Foreman, and he tries to make sense of these things. None of these apply today. But
what about the korban chagigah?
So that's already a particular form of. I think that would be the closest to shlamim because the people who brought it can eat it. They bring it to Jerusalem during the pilgrimages, and they can eat it. So that would be. Oh, I didn't write it here, but he's gonna make that point that both the owner's family and priests eat from the meat.
This was a way of in that time, because that was the way of that time. Now we make donations. We make donations to the synagogue. We make donations to a charity. We make donations to Israel. We make donations to the poor that cannot afford to buy whatever it is that they need. So we use money in the place of.
Yes, absolutely. So, and now I want to talk about the values that are behind each type of these sacrifices. So we'll see, they're not all cut out from the same cloth, and they represent different values. The values can certainly hold for us today as part of Judaism and ideas that and values that can propagate throughout our life. So not the way it was done in ancient Israel. And he explains the three different values that are behind that these sacrifices were intended to create. So I want to bring in now Rabbi Foreman And he'll continue with this idea of the different sacrifices and the values that each of them represented.
So how do we understand how these things relate to each other? What do they mean? What were they about? So what I'd like to do with you is examine these offerings in terms of a few different criteria. First of all, what are the laws of the offerings? Who partakes of the offering? 2, what are the names of the offering? What do we make of the names themselves? And C, where are the precedents for the offering? When is the earliest times that we have an example of this kind of offering? So let's start with chatat. Think back to the very first sin. That was the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So it's kind of interesting if you think about that sin, is that sin actually involved sort of illegal consumption on the part of people. We ate something we weren't supposed to eat, and then in this chatat we actually give back something to be eaten by Kohanim, who are sort of representing the divine here. As a matter of fact, if you go back to some of our parsha videos, they even talk about the Mishkan as a kind of human recreation of the garden. The comparison becomes even more striking. When we were in God's garden the first time, we transgressed and we ate this stuff, and now here we are and we're giving food to be eaten, essentially, back to representatives of God in this new garden, in this Mishkan. There seems to be a kind of tit for tat here. Think about what a transgression is. You can think about that word, to transgress. The English word trans means to cross over a line. It kind of suggests that involved in any transgression is a kind of line crossing, a kind of boundary crossing. When we think of the world, almost a map of the world, boundaries are part of the way we think about it. You know, sometimes those are natural boundaries, but often they're political boundaries. We would only imagine that you and me were in the world. We would imagine that part of the world is going to be my domain and part of the world is going to be your domain. We draw a line separating our domains. But now let me ask you a kind of funny question. Thinking about us and thinking about God, would you say there's anything in the world that's sort of God's domain? And would you say there's anything that's our domain? So going back to the garden, there's sort of a very simple answer to that. You know, God created us and he put us in this garden and he said, here's your domain. Mikol etz hagana chol tochel. Here's all these trees, and from all the trees of the garden you shall surely eat. Umeitz hadas tov v'ra, but there's one tree, the tree of good and evil, that I don't want you to eat from. That's my domain. That's my tree. Of course, the very first transgression was the transgression, the crossing over of that boundary. When we cross over a boundary improperly, so we've sort of violated that boundary. A violation of a boundary would say is a lack of respect of the territorial integrity of someone else. I ask for a certain kind of basic respect, which is that you leave my things alone. We ask for that in our human relations. And in relationships between us and God, it's no different. The least God can ask from us, really, is respect. Here's my tree, please don't eat my tree. To go eat from God's tree is a lack of respect. It's a transgression. And the way we atone for it is when we inadvertently transgress in that kind of way. So we say, look, the least I think I can do is to give you something from my domain and offer that to the Kohanim. So the Kohanim consume the chatat, the sin offering. Now, going back to the very first transgression, there's only one thing that's off limits. The Torah, later on, as the Torah develops, puts other things off limits. But in all of those other things, there's a little piece of the garden. There's a little piece of the forbidden fruit. There's a little piece of God saying, hey, this is my domain. I need you to stay away from this. If we transgress those commands, so we failed, if you would have to categorize it, in the area of respect. So respect is one of the great things that make the relationship between human beings and God work, but it's not the only thing. Life isn't just about respecting God. There's another thing we can strive for too, and that's where the shlamim comes in. The Torah in Vayikra calls a shlamim a zevach shlamim. So if we take those two words, zevach and shlamim, where's the first times that we see them? So we see a shlamim actually first in the Brit, in the covenant that takes place between God and Israel at Sinai. The people offered shlamim as part of that covenant. If you go back to the very first zevach, there was also a covenant. It was the covenant made by Yaakov and Lavan. It was sort of a treaty between them, as was Sinai. Nothing about the word shlamim comes from the word shalem, which either means peace or it means wholeness. There is a kind of wholeness that comes about through a covenant. When I reach out to you and you reach back to me, there is a kind of wholeness that is created there. Any transaction creates that kind of wholeness. At the lowest level, these are business transactions, but the highest level, these are really transactions of love. There's a marriage covenant, and in that covenant, I try to give to you freely, and I hope that you'll give back to me freely. When we make covenants, we sit down and we feast. We celebrate the kind of wholeness that comes with the covenant. That's what we celebrate in a marriage feast. So we celebrate in a treaty. Maybe that's a shlamim. And a shlamim is about different energy than respect. It's ultimately about the energy of love, the energy of building a covenant with God. So if we go back to that idea of boundaries, and we say there's part of the world that God has given to people, and then there's part of the world that, so to speak, God reserves for himself, that tree of knowledge paradigm, you might say that a shlamim is basically, well, let's share. Maybe I could give something from my boundaries to you, God, and I would hope that you would give something back to me. And indeed, that sharing is actually manifest within the shlamim itself in terms of how it's consumed. How is it consumed? It's shared. Part of it is consumed by the owners of the korban, and part of it is consumed by the kohanim, and part of it is burnt on the altar. It's shared among all parties. It's what a treaty is about. It's what a covenant is about. It's about sharing. But then there's one last kind of korban, and it represents the complete opposite end of the spectrum. It doesn't come because we've failed in some sort of respect to God, sort of our baseline obligation to God. It's not even about building a bridge of love with God. That's the shlamim. It's about something else. It's about awe, really a step higher in a way, even than love, at least when it comes to our relationship with God. Ola is about giving everything back. The Ola is entirely consumed on the altar. The very first Ola of the Torah is when God said to Abraham, give me your son, your only son, the one that you love, the one special thing that you have. You see how it's the inverse of the tree of knowledge? If the tree of knowledge is us sort of illegally and inappropriately taking God's one special thing from his domain, the Ola is when we voluntarily offer our one special thing, the thing that really by rights ought to be most mine, and I offer that back to God. The Akedah, the binding of Isaac, becomes the paradigm for Ola. What is that energy? The energy of Ola. It is the energy of awe. Awe is very different than love. Love is a relationship between equals. It takes two equals to be in love, each one giving to the other. Awe is not about a relationship between equals. It's where I feel myself to be virtually nothing in the presence of something so much larger than me. It's a sense of lying on the grassy knoll and looking up at the stars and feeling a sense of utter nothingness, that how could I reserve anything for myself? I'm a nothing in the face of God. One of the words that appear over and over again in the Binding of Isaac story is Yud Resh Aleph. Yud Resh Aleph in the Binding of Isaac story can mean one of two things. It can either mean to see, over and over again Abraham sees things, or it can mean awe. Now let me ask you a question. Those things that you're in awe of, that you feel yourself so small in the face of, when you see them really closely, do you get to be more in awe of them or less in awe of them? So the answer is it depends what. If it's like a magic trick, if it's something which is fake awe, well then you don't want to see it too closely, because if you look at it too closely, you won't be in awe of it anymore. But what if it's something that you really should be in awe of? Look at a human cell from far away, no big deal. Look at it under an electron microscope and it's the size of Manhattan, and then it's really quite a big deal. It's huge and it's so complex. Look at the universe, look at stars, look at galaxies. Look at them with a naked eye, no big deal. Look at them through the Hubble telescope. Quite a big deal indeed, then they're really awesome.
Okay, so he talks about three different values, and we can still create those values today with the mitzvot that we have today. We don't need the sacrifices for them. Right? He talked about respect, he talked about love, and he talked about awe. So I wanted to make a quick exercise. Which mitzvot generate which of these feelings or these values? What would you put in awe here? Which mitzvot today generate the awe?
Maybe prayer.
Prayer, being in synagogue. You're in synagogue, you dress differently, you behave differently, you don't say, hopefully lashon hara, and you don't curse, right? Yeah, I think it generates awe when we enter a synagogue. What mitzvah generates what he called the shlamim, the love? the value of love, of what mitzvot pertain to that value?
Putting on talit and tefillin.
Talit and tefillin? Okay. Interesting.
Maybe chesed,
We bind
tzedakah.
ourselves.
Yeah, chesed, charity, yeah, sharing
How
with
about,
others.
how about marriage?
Oh, marriage, definitely, it's a mitzvah, right? Marriage, family, excellent ideas. And finally, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, bein adam lachavero, bein adam lamakom. So
Right,
two
right.
kinds of love. I was mentioning one kind.
Okay, okay. And then
The
finally,
other answers.
what he called this, the chatzat, that he said was about respect. So what mitzvot help us with that idea of respect?
Honor thy father and mother, filial piety.
Okay, honoring parents. Yeah, absolutely. Respect parents. Here I would put talit into tefillin because I'm respecting God by wearing a certain thing every day and wearing a certain garment. I'm showing respect through my clothes. I think I would
Respect for a teacher.
Okay, respecting teachers, absolutely. Respecting teachers. So what we did is we took the ideas behind the sacrifices and now we can apply them to the mitzvot that are relevant to our lives. And I think that was a very nice idea that he offered. So with that, we will conclude today. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank
Yep,
you.
go up.
Okay.
Yesh koach.
Yeah.